in the city, back of my neck getting dirt and gritty. Bend down, isn't it a pity? Doesn't seem to be a shadow in the city. All around, people looking half dead, walking on the sidewalk hotter than a match. Yeah. But at night it's different, world. Go out and find
Hot
a girl. Come on and dance all
It's so
night.
hot.
Start to heat, it'll be all right. And babe, don't you know
Hello, everybody.
can't be like the nights in the summer.
How you feeling? Now, I know wherever the hell you are, we're up here in the Northeast. Of course, we have some cold winters. But when summertime hits, boy, do we get it squeezed out of us. Nice, big, muggy, hot, sizzling days. It's probably nothing to any of you Texans out there, everybody from Arizona who likes to email me bragging about your 120-degree days. Well, let me tell you something. I am not a sweater. I don't sweat that much. Oh, when I work out, I do. But this is just like cascading down your back kind of days, and they're just beginning. First day of summer is on Friday, but hey, you know what? That's good, because a nice, strenuous, hot, horrible, hate every minute of it of the day summer only means that the fall is going to be that much more refreshing. So I love it. I love the grit. I love the heat, and I love baseball going on all in the background of it all. That's just the way it goes over here. So listen, it is the 19th of June. It is a Wednesday night. It is Hump Day, and we have a great one up tonight here in the air-conditioned Studio A, quite frankly. And I have a guest. Oh, and also I should just say right off the bat, last night, the 18th, Joe Biden did not announce he's leaving the presidential race. So there was another insider from the boards, not surprising, did not materialize. Now, that doesn't mean that he's not in a, I don't know, that we're not talking about just a weird science project that continues to live. But still, just one of those things that we put on our radar. Anyway, tonight we have a fantastic guest is on with us. And even better, he's in the air-conditioned studio and out of his car that has no air conditioning. Jeremy Ryan Slate is here. He's a scholar with concentrations in theology and world religions, a podcast host, a brand consultant. We got to talk about all that stuff. But he has a master's in history of the Roman Empire. And I think that'll make for a very fun evening when you combine it all. Aside from the fact that we're local guys and we got plenty to talk about, and there's a lot going on in the world. Who the hell knows where it all goes tonight? But it'll be fun one way or another. So thank you for showing up tonight. Go and check out all of our wonderful sponsors on the affiliates page on quitefrankly.tv, including finding some solar power generators on Blue Monster Prep, because we're getting to the point where rough summers, rough winters may be a lot of strain on aging, outdated, obsolete power grids. And especially if you're somebody who has very, very sensitive things and need refrigeration or anything else, it might be good to go and look into something like that. And you can find all the information that you need on that stuff over there on bluemonsterprep.com. Get in touch with Pat and Gina if you need any further assistance with that. All right. I have some great ideas for tomorrow night's show. Friday night, as you know, I'm not on air. It's my first summer Friday. I'm going to think about something nice to do with Aurora and Lauren. But I also would like to say I'm so happy. I didn't prepare the video to show you guys, but maybe tomorrow night. Aurora has never seen fireflies show up yet. Okay, she has not had the battery power, the battery life in her little 3-year-old body just to get there. She's usually deliriously tired. She starts getting like an angry drunk sometime around 7:45. And once she gets to that angry drunk phase, it's just like, okay, yeah, throw her over my shoulder. Time to go upstairs. But last night we had a well-placed nap. We got home from her cousin, my nephew's graduation. And I said, okay, we must be like 20 minutes away from fireflies. We got to stay out here. And, we just went outside. I'm watering the plants. I'm watering this and that. We're just hanging out. It's a very, very beautiful evening. And then all of a sudden, almost like a light switch was flicked on. They emerged from the ground. And they're just like pitter-tweeting and stuff. I mean, they're all over the place. We're talking about dozens just emerge out of nowhere, just flying around, fluttering around each other, swarming. I'm like, Aurora, look. She comes running out of the back, and she's like, whoa. I don't know. I said, go catch some. So she's just running through clouds of fireflies and stuff, and it was really nice. I'm glad she saw it. But get to bed. All right, get to bed now. So there's that. Here's something for you, just as far as everybody out there who is on the fence as to whether or not they ever want to get into a commercial jet again. There's Jeremy, and the bottom left-hand corner. How you doing, man? Hold on, wait, that's not it. How you doing, man?
I'm doing all right, man. And it's funny enough, yeah, my air conditioner, my car broke this morning, so the hour and 40-minute drive was kind of interesting to your place today, man.
That's why I said whatever the hell. When you told me that you had that going on with your car, I said at least he's going to show up and he's going to be sitting here.
Yeah.
Because I'm going to have a little bit of a reprieve, and then maybe on the way home you'll be able to listen to the last 2 innings of the Yankee game, and perhaps it'll just be a little bit more sweet and cool outside.
What are we getting, like 70 pitches out of Garrett Cole tonight, or what do we think?
I don't know. They're probably going to give him like
four and a third or something like that.
50. Yeah, they call that a quality start these days. Don't even care about getting.
They're talking about dropping the 5-inning rule for getting a win. How crazy is that?
It's just ridiculous. I don't like what's going on, but apparently somebody thinks that it's good for the game. Anyway, here's something. I guess Jeremy's along for the ride now. Here's a headline for you that are on the fence about going back into a plane. The world's largest pilot union has now called to eliminate terms like cockpit, manpower, and other masculine generalizations for equity reasons.
Was that like the master bedroom? Everybody still knows it's the master bedroom.
Yes. That's just it. It's not the mistress bedroom. It's the master bedroom. The world's law. I'm sure somebody has stopped using it. They probably call it like the main room.
They call it the main bedroom now.
The main bedroom. The world's largest airline pilot union suggested airmen and women stop using terms purportedly offensive to women and LGBTQ individuals, calling out the terms like cockpit as non-inclusive. Boy, I'm telling you, whatever the hell unions were supposed to be at first, they have turned into completely overshooting by miles the evil that they were trying to balance out. It's just my opinion, Jeremy. I'm not trying to pull you down.
Did you see what California did? They got rid of the U-turn signs because people were offended that, it could be sexually demeaning in some way.
It was a U-turn sign in this one particular neighborhood where back in the 90s or something, it was a site of prolific gay prostitution. So they wanted to put the no U-turn signs in there so that they can cut down on people, the cruising and everything else that was going on over there, to cut down on prostitution. But of course, when they pulled that away, they pulled it down thinking like this was going to be like the Berlin Wall kind of symbolism. And and the news covered it by saying that these were signs that were put up to make it harder for gay men to meet each other.
Wow.
And like it was just like...
They can't use like the internet or something?
Yeah, I know, but it was just like, what? They weren't strolling through the park on a nice June evening. Like, hello, fellow gay man. Hello, have a nice evening. That's not what was going on. We're talking about sexual transactions here.
Yeah.
Anyway, this is the world we're in. But anyhow, here's another one for you. Did you hear about this, Jeremy? The Tesla CEO, Elon Musk, has admitted that 2 homicidal maniacs have tried to kill him in the past 7 months.
Wow.
Somebody in his position, I'm surprised it's only 2, to be honest. And it's not a fun thing. But during a question and answer session for Tesla's annual shareholder meeting, the electric automaker CEO Elon Musk noted that multiple attempts on his life in the past 7 months have occurred for no seemingly apparent reason other than his social and business prominence. The response stemmed from an investor's inquiry asking the billionaire what he's doing to take care of himself with his high-profile nature. Now, in your personal work, Jeremy, with the consulting, the brand consultation that you do, is this something along the lines that you would pick up with a client? Would you go into how they carry themselves outside the show, how they engage in public settings to kind of fuel interest in their broadcast? Like, was it something along those lines?
Yeah. Well, here's what I say. So what we do as a company is we help people to get on the right podcast because we think that medium really makes sense, and branding is a really, really important part of that, right? And how you're perceived and how people view you. So, for example, if you were going to take a photo where you're in front of a grill, and on that grill you're cooking raw ground beef with cheese on top of it, and your name's Chuck Schumer, that's probably a really bad brand move for you, or whatever Kathy Hochul wanted to do with her burgers. But the thing you have to consider, like when you think of public relations, it's how you relate to others and how they perceive you. And I like to say the number one thing that you're doing in public relations is the sale of an idea. You're getting somebody to have an idea about you, your brand, and what you do. And you have to think that public relations it's business, but it's also personal. So how you carry yourself and how you treat other people, whether you're working or whether you're not, that's a big public relations thing. Like if you run a great business, but you're a total dick outside of work, well, that's a big issue for you, right? That is a brand issue because it's going to be perceived somewhere. It's going to get picked up on social media. So you need to be who you are at all times, right? And you need to make sure you're always making sure that you're putting out the perception because people are taping at all times. And at the same time, it's just better to be a good person. Like I think that's generally just a good way to be. Unless you're Chuck Schumer, then nobody can really help you.
You can't really help. And I try. You know what gets me? I understand that there too. I'm very, very in tune with the Gary Vaynerchuk way of going out into the world and to present yourself, to just be leading with joy and all that. I hate the fact that what we talk about sometimes out of necessity because you can't ignore it anymore. I mean, I guess if you're in the comedy world, depending on what brand of comedy, if you're like writing skits or something like that, you might be able to just stay in that fluffy zone of just positivity and good feelings and all that stuff. But I feel like everything is just so combative outside of that. I get home sometimes and I look at, I see like a reel that comes up on Instagram or a short on YouTube, and there's just a really feel-good moment that happens. And it makes me, I don't know, somebody does something nice for somebody else, or a victory, a well-known sports victory, something that really just excites you in a really good, pure way. And I'm like, man, I want to live inside of that zone. And then I start thinking about every night the people that I go after, because I just see like Chuck Schumer. How am I supposed to say something nice about that guy?
Well, he's worth, I think, $70 million, and the man's never actually held a job. He went right from law school to being a Senate page to being in the Senate. Like, what the hell?
I know. And these people, on top of that, it's frustrating to see people who are really generally worthless that are able to plant themselves into these positions. But the fact that part of their job is to actually get inside the heads of people that you have grown up with your entire lives and turn them into, reactionary battle bots for political causes that have absolutely no benefit coming their way. No matter how much they think it's going to come their way, that they're going to make society better, it's only going to get worse if we follow these people any further. And that gets me just really fucking angry.
Yeah. And you need to get some chickens, man. That's the difference. So, like, I'll be 100% honest with you, because you know what? Is life perfect all the time? No. Do I get pissed sometimes? Yeah, absolutely. But I live more like out in the country of New Jersey. Like, people don't think we exist, but we do. We're real people. And, I have 24 chickens. I have a pig, a bunch of dogs, 3 daughters now. And having those things to work on and always having a project to do and having those things to kind of, I don't know if this makes sense, but like be able to work with your hands a lot actually helps you to get a lot of those things out. We build a barn, or my wife had me build a new barn door in the house, or we're always doing some sort of a project. We took our garage and we turned our garage into an office building. So I'm always doing something. And for me, I think that's a really good way to level myself out. I'll tell you as well, I don't do as much as I did in my 20s. I was a competitive powerlifter in my 20s, but fitness is a huge part of my life. Every single day I start with my fitness routine. I think that's really, really important.
Yeah, you're on it. And I'm with. I don't have a barn.
Yeah.
I don't have a lot of property, but I am doing those projects, and I have my family, and I throw myself into that, and I really enjoy those weekends, and it's a saving grace. It really is. Now, are you anywhere near the Pine Barrens and stuff?
No, so I'm actually right near like the Poconos. So I'm on the New Jersey side of the Poconos.
Okay.
So we're like literally like it's cornfields everywhere. I grew up picking beans on a farm as a kid, so it's I was kind of like a migrant before it was cool.
Before it was cool. Before it was state sponsored. Oh man, yeah. See, there's a lot. There's a lot here we're going to be able to do tonight, and I can't wait. So you act more so as a publicist than anything else.
Yeah, that's exactly what we do.
Okay, I see. I thought that you guys produced podcasts in particular. So
that's 2 parts of what we do. We started as a production company in 2015. And what we found is our clients really liked the 20% of what we did, which was when we launched their show, we put them on a bunch of really cool podcasts. So we actually dropped the production side of things and started just focusing on how can we do a better job at helping our clients get the right story, helping them get on the right podcast, teaching them what to do with the content after, because that's also vital. I think a lot of people think when you go on a show, it's just the show and it's over. But it's also, what are you going to do with this content you created in your new marketing? And also, how are you going to build a relationship with that person?
Yeah.
We started producing shows again in the last 6 months or so, just because with a lot of the AI tools, it's become a lot more affordable and cost effective to do that. But our main business is really getting people on shows. That's
Command Your Brand, it's called.
Command Your Brand.
Okay. Well, hey, we may have to talk after this. Anybody, ladies and gentlemen, sit back, relax, enjoy the show. We're going to kick this one off now in grand style, come back and really just dive into history and dive into our lives, take calls from you and questions from you. I already have a couple of great questions that have been submitted by the audience for Jeremy and just for general consideration. So that's it. We'll see you on the other side. Please share the show wherever you're watching it, whether it be live or on demand. It does not matter. We'll be right back.
You let one ant stand up to us, then they all might stand up.
Those puny little ants outnumber us 100 to 1. And if they ever figure that out, there goes our way of life.
It's not about food. It's about keeping those ants in line. That's why we're going back.
Does anybody else want to stay?
Let's ride!
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. This is a nice night. It really is a nice night already here with our guest, and we're going to be talking. Hey, first of all, happy belated. I want to say something else. Happy belated Father's Day to everybody, and we have a winner for the grinder from the Coffee Revolution for everybody that bought, quite frankly, coffee over the course of Father's Day week last week, and it is Ryan M as in Mary, Ryan M from Georgia. So I'm sure that page has reached out to you already. So congratulations. Happy Father's Day. That's like a $400 grinder and brewer and all that stuff. So let me know how your first cup of coffee was after that one. But yeah, on to our guest tonight. Another father.
Yeah.
Happy Father's Day to you too, man.
Thanks, man. Happy Father's Day to you.
Oh, it was a wonderful day. What
did you do for Father's Day?
Talking about projects with your hands, I built a trellis.
Nice.
On Father's Day. And then, of course, we went to go see my father-in-law and, ended the day back home with my father that came over. So it was nice.
That's cool. We took our two oldest because we had our third child about a week ago, so my wife's kind of still laying pretty low.
Congrats, man.
Thank you. So my father-in-law and I took our two oldest, and we went to, I don't know if you ever heard, it's called Land of Make-Believe.
Yes.
Like a really cool, kids park, but it's small, and it's from the 50s. So we had a really, really good time going on some rides and stuff. I will tell you though, man, I feel like every time I go to a theme park, I actually feel so much better about myself when I observe just some of the humans walking around.
on a number of levels, right? On a number of levels.
Well, I'm not doing half bad, man.
Seriously. Going out in public these days is a great reminder not to compare yourself to anybody.
Yeah.
And not to run yourself ragged. I'm not doing enough. I'm not doing enough. All you got to do sometimes is just go outside of the house and you see how some people are living. I mean, physically.
Yeah.
And then, of course,
I saw this kid. He couldn't have been more than 13. And I kid you not, Frank, he's 50 to 75 pounds overweight. I'm like, how does that happen at 13? How does that happen?
And then you see the parents.
The parents were regular looking people. I'm like, how does that happen?
Okay, well, that's something else. I mean, there's a lot First of all, the choices are still being made.
Yeah.
From the top down. But there's a lot there, man. People are in bad shape. And I think the one thing is this too, because there's a lot of in shape assholes out there. Mm-hmm. But it's more so about communication. We have very, very poor communicate, and you can just see how everybody communicates so poorly.
Yeah.
And maybe that's because across several generations now that are all living together, we're all using the same technology. We're all immersed in a new kind of social existence where it's just we take for granted the kind of responsibility we once needed to have in order to get a point across, to be articulate, to kind of also be courteous.
Yeah.
In maybe voicing an opinion. I don't know, but things have just gotten very, very weird when you talk to people out there.
Yeah, well, I think also like social media has made us a lot less social in a lot of ways because, I don't know, when I text people, I still write in full sentences because that's just how I communicate. And then to me, like if I have to figure out what the heck you're saying from a text message, it's kind of weird. But we get such instant communication, there's nothing to talk about. You know what I mean? Like the things you would talk to people about, they already know about. So it's made social settings really, really weird. Does that make sense?
It does. And I only have 2 friends that write back to me in voice notes. Everybody else, I send voice notes to everybody. And so, sometimes if it's just like a yes, no, or something, a joke, a meme or whatever, I'll send those things. But I love sending voice notes to people because if this is going to be a quick little interaction, let's at least hear a voice here.
That's funny because I actually did that with you a lot leading up to this conversation, not realizing that was like your thing.
I'm fine with it. I love it. I'm like, this is great. Well, I have a friend of mine, my friend KJ. I send him, just like anybody else, I'll send him a voice note, asking him a question or whatever, and he'll write back to me, this fucking guy with the voice notes again. He'll write back to me, this guy with the voice. I was like, well, send me one back then, dick. Come on.
It's human though, right? I think that's the biggest reason like things like podcasts are doing so well because we've dropped human communication out of things so much that people are just dying for some form of humanity. And if it's them listening to 2 people yap, they're going to do that. Like people are really looking for that human touch because it's been pushed out of everything.
Well, that's why that's a big part of the reason why I love it. I really do. So our guest is you.
Yeah.
Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
I was and you host a show of your own, the Jeremy Ryan Slate Show. I saw my friend Charlie Robinson was on recently.
Charlie is the man.
He is
the man. We just I was actually on Union of the Unwanted with him a couple months ago, and then we hit it off, and then I was on his show, and then he was on my show again recently.
He's doing the second book we've done last year. This time in June, we were doing a book club together. He was my co-host, and we were reading the source material for Field of Dreams, Shoeless Joe. And we had such a good time. I said, hey, you want to come back in June and do another summer read? Now we're doing Ray Bradbury. And so when I was looking at what you've been doing lately, and I saw Charlie pop up, I was like, damn. And you also spoke with Dan Carlin not too long ago, huh?
So that was actually an older episode we reused because it's funny enough, it happened right before the pandemic. And he raised this whole point of, you know how Dan talks, how would people respond if there was a pandemic? This was kind of like right before. So I kind of wanted to do like a postscript on that by replaying the episode and being like, well, I guess Dan was right. We did respond in some really, really funny ways. I'm a huge hardcore history fan, though.
I mean, that was an OG like podcast giant.
Yeah.
When everybody, before the time when everybody had their own show, that just was one of those things. The slim pickings back then, but Dan Carlin and Hardcore History was among them all. I haven't listened in years, admittedly.
I'm a big history podcast fan. The one I've been hooked on recently is called Cost of Glory. Mm-hmm. Really, really good show. He does these like episode series on like the lives of different people from like classical history. Because I feel like you can learn so much about like how these people reacted that you can apply to your life. It's really, really interesting stuff.
And is it an ongoing serial? Do they have seasons and stuff like that?
So what he does is he's doing it by Plutarch's Lives. And so Plutarch took like kind of the most interesting people. He starts with Greek history and then he eventually moves into Roman history. And he takes like the most interesting people like Julius Caesar, Sulla. And he does these like 3 or 4 episode series on one person's life. So it's really, really interesting because you get so much in-depth information on that person and kind of like what they did, their achievements, their wins, their failures, and there's a lot to learn from it.
Well, you went into, I mean, you've got degrees in theology and, of course, the masters in the Roman Empire. We're going to need both of them tonight. but did you go into college knowing, hey, I want to study Rome? Or is that one of those things where along the way you said, hey, I really love this. Look, for me, that's how I picked up my minor in history as well, as I dropped some things off and I said, you know, some elective classes just turned into a minor. I wish I majored in history. I wish I did this stuff.
Yeah.
But was this something you went in knowing you wanted to do?
So I started as a theology major. That was always my intention. And I recommend, not that I even think everybody should be going to college anymore. My viewpoint's changed on it a lot. But I kind of took classes by how much they interested me. So I took like ethics, deontological ethics. I took logic. I took a lot of courses that like I think taught me a lot. And then I got to my senior year and my advisor was like, you know, if you take like 2 more classes, you could double major. And if you were really thinking about this, you could have triple majored, but you kind of screwed up by not taking those other classes because Seton Hall had this sliding scale where if you took 12 to 18 credits, they were the exact same price. So I just took 18 credits every semester. So I just took things by how much they interested me. And then when I had this really, really awesome history professor, Dr. Sean Lake, and I'm actually still really good friends with him now. We're actually working on a book on the Roman Empire. And he was one of the coolest professors I ever had in undergrad, and I got really interested in Alexander the Great. I was absolutely obsessed with Alexander the Great. I've read every book you could imagine. I've watched every movie you could imagine. I just find him historically to be a very, very interesting character because he starts off as this philosopher king, and gradually power corrupts him, and he becomes this just egomaniacal, I think I'm God maniac. And I think it's really interesting to observe that and learn a lot of lessons from that. So I read this really weird, obscure article my senior year of college called Augustus at Actium. Actium is the last battle of the Roman Civil War. It's when Augustus becomes the first emperor. But he goes to this city, Actium, which is in Greece, and he prays before the sarcophagus of Alexander the Great, who at that point, he had died in 323, so he's been dead for like 300 years at that point in time. I'm like, that's really weird. And I'm like, why did he do that? So then I looked at what a lot of Augustus did, and I realized he saw Alexander as this kind of like precursor to convincing people you were divine. And so he did a lot of what Alexander did, and it was actually very successful, you know, for next to 500 years, getting people to worship the Roman emperor. So that's how I got kind of sucked into the whole Rome side of things. It wasn't because like, oh my gosh, Roman Empire. It was, I'm obsessed with Alexander the Great. I own not even the director's cut. It's like the extreme director's cut of the Oliver Stone movie Alexander. Like I'm very interested in the history of Alexander.
Really? What happened to the sarcophagus?
It disappeared at one point in time because it went to different cities. It was in Actium for a bit. It was in Alexandria for a bit. It was in Pharsalus for a bit. And historically, they just kind of lose track of it, and nobody really knows what happens to it. And there's this kind of legend that supposedly when Augustus goes to visit it, he broke the nose off by mistake. So we don't know if that's actually true, but another interesting, funny fact about it.
That's an interesting thing right there, because you know all throughout history, there's just so many of these thoughts about where something with immense value just to our story, where they may be. Were they lost somewhere? Did they go down in a ship somewhere? Or is there a lost catacomb somewhere where there's an incredible treasure? That's why I love movies like National Treasure.
Yeah.
Just little spin-off theories that make it fun storytelling that reference back to like the Library of Alexandria or something like that. But to think that Alexander the Great's sarcophagus may be out there still somewhere with him inside of it. Is that possible? Or was it destroyed?
I would, in my thought process is if anything, it didn't make it past the later destructions of Alexandria because it's destroyed a few times. Caesar notoriously also burns parts of the Library of Alexandria, not the whole thing. But it's historically been beat up a lot. I don't think it made it through a lot of those unless there's a really interesting series, I think it's on National Geographic, about the search for the tomb of Alexander. Mm-hmm. And this lady, she spent years of her life trying to find it, and she's kind of come up to the same idea that like it just may not be out there anymore.
Do you know how the Romans, do you know how they may have celebrated Juneteenth?
They had this thing, funny enough, it was called Saturnalia. Are you familiar with Saturnalia?
Yes, actually.
Where slaves and their masters would at that day for a year would change places. It was one of the things they did on Saturnalia. So it's not exactly Juneteenth, but it's another interesting, weird thing the Romans did.
That's exactly what it is today, though. Now, for people who had nothing to do, if you really think about it, the whole the deification and the kind of the benediction of Juneteenth has become something almost like almost 200 years later. Now you're talking about people who had nothing to do with that past.
Well, it's tough because it's like part of that. What is it? The 1609 project? Is that what it was?
1619.
1619 project. It's a lot of revisionist history that's come in, and I think at times, it's people that don't know their past, they aren't able to control their present, and they don't have a future. And I think that's a real concern, right? Because if you don't know your past and what actually happened, right or wrong, right? You don't have to, we're not to decide if history is right or wrong. It happened, and we want to learn from it. But I think a lot of times this revisionist history, it's dangerous because we're going to commit the same mistakes, right? Like if we don't know things from our history. Well,
yeah, and that's really the takeaway when reading someone like Howard Zinn and something like that too. It's not even revisionist is one way of putting it, but there's also just a brand of being negativist, where some people would say that when we look at history, it's written by the victors, one war or another, overt, covert ways, whatever. But so the real thing there is that people would say that history is perhaps out of balance, that we're only seeing one side of it.
Yes and no, because I think there's some of that, right? Like if you want to look at the year that Rome fell, they say it fell in 476, but that's only because the people that wrote about it worked for Emperor Justinian, who was the person that actually attacked Rome and tried to bring it back into the empire. But then you look at a lot of like history written in the last 30 years, that the problem with it is a lot of it's postmodernist history, right? Which is it's history that's influenced by Marxism, and it's influenced by kind of this clash of classes or class of cultures. But then you look at something like the Roman Civil War, which is 133 BC to 31 BC. It's not how we would think of a civil war. It's the rich people all fighting together, and the poor people literally have nothing to do with it. So I think it's very interesting. Like the perceptions of what we have of history is also based on the schools we learn history through.
Yeah, there's so much. You put out a thread. I'd love to do this thread with you.
Sure.
Because it said, this is from June 13th. You had another one out on June 1st that I had set aside for tonight. But when this came out on the 13th, said, hey, you know what? What the hell? I mean, you write constantly. And everybody, you can find Jeremy on Twitter at Jeremy Ryan Slate. And it's all there up on the screen. We'll do it right now.
I'm still not able to call it X, by the way. How about you? I struggle with it, man. I can't do it.
I'm not going to do it.
Because most people don't know what I'm talking about. You know what I mean?
Now, so I'll see you on X. It sounds weird. It's just Twitter. I don't give a shit. And it's just like when you got here before.
Yeah.
And I said, did you take the GW or did you take the Tappan Zee?
Tappan Zee, baby.
I'm never going to call it the Mario Cuomo Bridge.
Yeah.
It's always going to be the Tappan Zee, and maybe in a couple of generations when they're kids, these kids that come up that don't know any better.
Well, I guess do you call it the Triborough Bridge, or what do you call the other one? Because I know they changed all the names in the city.
They changed the Triborough to the RFK.
Yeah. So do you call it the RFK or the Triborough?
That one I'm not that connected to.
Okay.
I actually go back and forth.
Okay.
By the time I was really...
Because that's right up by Randall's Island in that area.
By the time I was really using it,
yeah,
especially when we were playing gigs around here, by the time I was really using it, it had only like 1 or 2 years left as the Triborough.
Okay.
And, if I'm going into the city, in my parents' car or somebody's, but by the time I'm downloading MapQuest and doing all that shit, it was already the RFK.
Printing out the papers and keeping them on the seat next to you and hoping you don't miss a turn.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, those are the worst. Those are the worst. And you would think that you would think that with all of the like when the Garmins and stuff came out, it would get easier. But
it was always searching for signal, man. You never knew where you were.
It is searching for signal, and at least when you have somebody sitting next to you with the MapQuest, you have someone you could blame.
Yeah.
Because there's someone like, are you, wake up. Where are you? Come on, where, how close are we? Yeah. And if we miss the turn, it's this person's, it's Chewbacca's fault over here, but exactly. That's just a terrible co-pilot. It's not my fault. Anyway, so you have this thread over here, the Roman Empire versus the Roman Republic.
Yeah.
And I think this is a great way to start really layering in the parallels to modern America because, for combative, conversational, and debate purposes, we love telling the democracy pushers that we're not a democracy. We are a constitutional republic. And of course, that is what we are on paper, but we don't function as a republic. We haven't functioned as a republic since, at least the Civil War. So there's a lot there. And I just want to stop along the way. This is already your writing.
Yeah.
So stop along the way and let's expand on some stuff.
Yeah. Well, so I guess the thing that's important to understand first is that Rome has like 3 eras in time. Because I think when people hear Rome, they a lot of times think of characters like Julius Caesar, and they think of, Sulla and people like that. And it's funny because they're actually Roman Republic characters, but people think of the Roman Empire. Does that make sense? I think there's often that confusion with people. So Rome is founded first in 753 BC as a kingdom. And I'm going to do BC and AD, by the way. We're not doing BCE and CE, which is the woke history way of doing it.
Right.
Anno Domini, in the year of our Lord. So in 753, it's founded as a kingdom by a guy named Romulus. And it's funny because Romulus is the first of 7 kings, which were probably more like warlords. They weren't like what we would think of as kings. If you think of the movie Braveheart and think of the warlords, that was probably more of what those kings were like. He was probably the least likely to exist of all 7 of them. And he was the first because he's kind of like this Mr. Rome character. There's this idea of, did he give his name to the city or did the city give its name to him, right? Because they have all these things they don't know how to place, they don't know where they came from, so they attribute them to one guy. So he's the least likely to exist of these.
I thought it was Remus as well.
So Remus is his brother.
Yeah.
And once again, there's lots of legends around this. There's Remus is killed by a local band, Remus is killed by Romulus, there's whatever happens to Remus, we don't know. But there's lots of different legends on how he dies.
Suckled by the wolf.
Suckled by the wolf, which wolf, the Latin word for wolf is actually similar to the Latin word for prostitute. So it may have actually just been a prostitute that raised them, if that even ever happened. And there's a whole story about that too, if you wanted to get into that, about how Romulus and Remus came to be. But anyway, he's the first king. There's 7 of them traditionally. The last of those is Tarquin the Proud, and his kingship ends in 509 because his son rapes a woman named Lucretia, and people get really mad, and this guy named Brutus ends up killing him. And it's funny because the Brutus family is the same family later on which will kill Julius Caesar. That's why there's thoughts, once again, that maybe Brutus never killed the last king. Maybe they wrote that after Brutus killed Caesar to try and make it sound like, well, we always kill our kings, right? Like, we don't want to have kings. So it ends in 509. From 509 to 31 BC, it's the Roman Republic. And that's kind of the idea of republicanism existing. And the Greeks and the Romans fight about kind of who had the form of government first. So the Greeks say that they had democracy in 508. The Romans like to say they had republic in 509. So there's often this kind of back and forth with them. When you think of the classical age of Roman Greece, a lot of the philosophers we think of, the classical age of Greece is around 300 to 400. So you can kind of place that on the Roman time track, BC. So by the time we get to the end of the Republic, which is in 31 BC, from 31 until 476 AD is the Roman Empire. And that's kind of the whole time period I think people are most familiar with, though they take a lot of the Republic characters and think they're more empire characters. The Eastern Roman Empire actually lasts until 1453 under the Ottomans. And they wouldn't have considered themselves Byzantines, which is what they're later called. They would have thought of themselves as Romans. So I think that's kind of the important thing to understand, that there's 3 eras in time, and each one is very different for what you get in those eras in time.
Yeah, and that's what I wanted to get a little bit of differentiation here tonight, too. And the other thing there, too, that I really love is that no matter how much reading I do and how many Discovery Channel documentaries have been done there, why is it that the Etruscan kings prior to the establishment of Rome is so mysterious? All I keep hearing is that there's so little that we know about the Etruscans before Rome. Was it just because
lack of written language? Like that's a big part of it.
Really
yeah, because you have to think of this is kind of going into Greek culture, going back in the same time period. But the Mycenaeans would have existed around the same time as the Etruscan kings, and they kind of had the first written language, which is called Linear A. Linear A, we haven't found an exact translation how to translate it. So I think that's part of the problem too. There's things that exist, but we don't know how to read them. So the Mycenaeans, like I said, are running a similar time track to the Etruscans, and they have a language, but we can't read it. So that's also part of the problem, is we just don't know enough about that. But Julius Caesar actually does like to trace his own lineage to the Etruscan kings, which is part of why he wears the robes he wears during his time as dictator.
The what? Purple?
Yeah.
That's Etruscan?
It's traced back to the Etruscan kings, yeah.
Wow. Okay. Well, that's something else. Before we get into this, let me ask, just as a real quick aside.
Yeah.
What would you say? Because we know out of this, we're going to get into the collapse. We're going to get into the reasonings, the parallels to where we are right now. But what would you say was the moment in the entire history of Rome that you believe it was at its peak, both in
117 AD?
Okay. That's where it was the strongest militarily, the strongest land ownership-wise, but also as far as sustainability goes and as far as culture goes. What do you think? Why?
So at that point in time, it's under the Emperor Trajan in 117 AD. It's territorially the largest size that Rome will ever be. It's never going to be that same size again. And that's because after Trajan, you're going to have Emperor Hadrian. Hadrian is the guy that actually builds the wall in Britain and says, we're not going to go past this point anymore. We're going to defend the wall. So once Rome decides to stop expanding, it's going to change how money functions. It's going to change how Rome brings in the military, because in the late Republic and early Empire, Rome doesn't tax people. That comes a little bit later. What they actually do is they ask for your soldiers, because if they have your soldiers, they can continue to conquer. So when they would conquer somebody, they say, okay, you have to give us this many soldiers to serve in the Roman army. And when you're not really able to do that anymore, it is going to change a lot of how things function. So taxation changes dramatically. Wealth changes dramatically, because Rome was able to continue to get wealthy because it was continually expanding, right? So it's bringing new things in. And once it can't do that, it's going to feed off of just what it has, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and you can see why. I think anybody at home can see why this is one of those things that kind of make us look in the mirror and reflect on what we're doing today. Of course, not in the same kind of ways where we're occupying. We definitely do occupy land that we should not be in, but there's also more invisible occupations that are going on, and it's really interesting stuff. Let's get into this though, because I love this thread that you put up here. Roman Empire versus Republic, which is more important for explaining America's future and possible solutions? Which is, I like that there too. What's the solution? First, we need to look at the terms. Now, you talk about the kingdom, the republic, the empire. All right, we get into that.
And then the empire itself breaks into two time periods. There's the Principate, which is kind of the early empire. So that's the year 31 until about 284. It changes under Emperor Diocletian in 284. It becomes the Dominate. And the Dominate is more of this despotic, direct rule. People aren't really going to see the emperor. If they see him, they're going to see him from far away. And an emperor in the Dominate, he's trying to preserve his power and not die. Because in that time period, you would have them raising army and attacking each other and doing things like that. So it's very different. In the Principate before that, not that people liked being ruled, but how people viewed the emperor was very different. He was kind of a first citizen character, because Principate comes from the word princeps, which means first citizen, because Augustus saw himself as this first citizen, kind of ahead of the powers of Rome that already existed. So it still had a Senate like it should have. It still had a lot of the offices that it should have. They didn't function the same way, but it was much more of this guy ruling from within the empire that he ruled. Whereas when you get to the Dominate, they're separating themselves. And it's actually a big model for medieval kingship, is a lot of what Diocletian does in 284. And he actually is one of the first ones to wear what's called the diadem, which is the crown on his head, which becomes the crown of medieval kings. So it is a very different type of rule, and I just think it's an important delineation to make between the early empire and late empire. It
is, and I'm glad I'm learning it. You said that many of the most famous Romans are from the Roman Revolution period. Okay, Julius Caesar, Marcus Tullius Cicero, Lucius Cornelius Sulla, Gaius Marius. You list them. I'll list them over there, but this is where it starts really getting good. There are some comparisons between our modern day and the Roman Revolution. It's not a revolution of how we have thought of them, rich versus poor, or the powerful versus the powerless. It's a private power struggle between the rich for control that takes to the public streets. Now, I gotta say,
he looks like George Clooney, by the way, right? But it's not him.
This guy over here?
Yeah.
You're right. You're right. what you just described right there does sound a lot like what we're going through right now.
And I think that's the interesting thing, because there's been a lot of a lot of discussions about this. I know at Cost of Glory did if you check him out on X, he did a really great thread about the fall of the Republic and how that's similar to now. So I see a lot of those things being similar, but I think the problem that we have is, as I mentioned, we haven't been a functional republic in a long time. So I think the things that we actually should be worrying about are more empire problems, right? Like I think this power struggle between the powerful, they don't actually have any power, so they're just kind of fighting for what doesn't really matter. Does that make sense?
It does. Well, I mean, it's gang warfare.
Yeah.
There in the background, there is just the setting. We have the setting, we have the props, we have everything that makes it seem like we are in America. But really, all the rules, they don't pertain to what America's charter is.
Yes.
It just has nothing to do with it anyway. So it's really just a matter about who has the political capital left to be able to go out there and write an executive order, knowing that they have right people in the right circuits, that'll be able to turn this into a constitutional issue or whatever. So, and then of course, then the real warfare is played out in the media, and what they usually do is they marshal all of their, low man on the totem pole resources to run amok. That's the great, especially when it comes to distracting people away from real heinous crimes that are being committed.
Yeah.
So I mean, like I said before, when we think about Chuck Schumer, the reason why people like him really make me want to say horrible things on air every night whenever we talk about them. That's why I go off course a lot, off topic, but is because they affect the people around us that we got to live with. People that have me and them have no stake in the outcome of these rich, bureaucratic gangs are doing to battle each other and
That's
get
correct.
one up. There's no, I mean, the only real outcome that we have stake in is if there was some kind of a restoration of that decentralized republic model where local is where the real rubber meets the road. And even then, you're not going to be able to have everything you want locally. So, which is why in America, you would be able to, take your family and move one town over where the culture is a little bit more pleasing to you. All of that flexibility is going away because they're centralizing at the top and trying to make the world right, trying to make the species right. And it's horrible. It's psychological, mostly the war, but it's getting physical now.
And I think there are real parallels between that and the Roman Revolution. As I said, that goes from 133 to 31. And it's interesting because I think everybody talks about Julius Caesar, but they don't realize he's kind of the last one to fill a power vacuum at the end. He didn't start this whole thing by himself. In 133 BC, there's these two brothers, Tiberius and Gaius Gracchus. And they start to do a lot of, they're tribunes at that point in time, which is a political office below consul. And they try to do land reforms to give land to troops that have come back after serving for a period of time because they don't really have a retirement. So I guess that's essentially a good thing, right? It's a populist thing they want to do. People don't like that because the political class doesn't like that. So what happens is Tiberius Gracchus is actually assassinated in the Senate chambers. 10 years later, his brother Gaius Gracchus tries to do very similar things, but they get to the point that they have roaming bands of gangs in the street threatening people when they try to go to vote. So Gaius Gracchus takes this to a point where he becomes like a guy that seems like he wants to be king, and he's using force to do it. So once again, we don't exactly know what happens to him. There's some thoughts that he paid his slave to kill him because he didn't want other people to kill him, but he dies at the end of this period. After that, there's a guy named Gaius Marius, and the thing that's important about him is consul was the highest political office you could hold in Rome. And there were two at a time because they didn't want one man to hold power, and they'd hold power for a year. Once you held the consulship, you couldn't hold it again for another 10 years. So Marius in his life, and he didn't live to be 70 years old, he had 7 consulships. Because every time there was a military problem, they'd be like, oh, well, let's give him the consulship again. He'll solve the problem. So there's wars against Jugurtha, there's wars against the Cimbri, and they keep giving this guy consulships because they think he's going to solve their problems. So now you're breaking how things are done politically, right? You're breaking how the system's supposed to work. Mm-hmm. So one of his guys below him, he's what's called a praetor. They managed money and things like that, but they were also had military office. is this guy named Sulla. And in my opinion, I know I have a friend that vehemently disagrees with me on this, and actually, believe it or not, Sulla is Elon Musk's favorite historical character. Sulla is vicious. Him and Marius have this private disagreement. So then in 88 BC, Sulla raises an army and actually attacks the city of Rome to make himself in charge. He's the first person to ever do this. Marius and his army flee, and he'll die later on in Greece at an old age, not really doing much. So then Sulla goes out to handle a war against a guy named Mithridates. He then comes back into Rome in 82 BC, and he becomes dictator from 82 to 78 BC. During that time period, he does this process called a proscription. And this is one of the most evil things that has ever been done. What he does is the first day there's 80 names on a tablet in the square in the forum. The second day there's 200 names in the tablets in the forum. And what would happen is if your name was on this list, you would be killed, all your property would be taken away, and your head would be put on a pike in the middle of the forum. The way that they would show you were dead was by bringing your head. So there's a problem with this. Number one, it creates chaos because nobody knows why their name is getting on the list. They're just enemies of Sulla. But number two, people start putting their private enemies on the list. And they'll be like, oh, yeah, Sulla, you don't remember? You wrote that guy's name on there. Yeah, he's a bad guy. So it gets chaotic. There's an 18-year-old Julius Caesar that gets his name put on the list because Sulla wants him to divorce his wife. He has the right friends. They get his name pulled off the list. He doesn't have to divorce his wife. But Sulla is really this guy that creates this massive power vacuum where he's in Rome. The office of dictator was only supposed to last 6 months because they assumed one person could solve a problem better than two people. So they would give one person ultimate power for 6 months. And he was supposed to lay it down. Sulla holds that power for 4 years. And so it really, once again, breaks how things were traditionally done. So you're seeing how the system's kind of breaking down over this time period.
Yeah.
Then in 59 BC, Julius Caesar becomes consul. So he's consul for that year. And the thing that's different about that is he has this political enemy. His name's Cato the Younger. And the Cato family is actually very famous. During the Punic War, Cato the Elder is the guy that continually says, Carthago delendum est, or Carthage must be destroyed. Cato the Younger is a much less impressive character than his historical relative, but he's Caesar's enemy. And so you would have what are called clients at that point in time. Those are people that basically like paid you money for things you would do for them. And one of his clients is this guy named Marcus Biblius. So the two consuls in 59 are Julius Caesar and Marcus Biblius. And the first thing Caesar wants to do is land reform for veterans, just like the Gracchi do in 133, right? And if I'm getting too complex, Frank, feel free to stop me. This is all important.
I want to hear it.
So he serves for that year, and he gets the land reforms passed, and Cato tries to block the land reforms, and Biblius tries to block the land reforms. So Caesar actually takes the vote to the people, which has never been done before. And the people actually help Caesar to force in the land reforms for the retired veterans that he wants. So then they actually chase Biblius into his home, and Biblius doesn't leave his home for the rest of his consulship year. So typically you'd call a year the year of the consuls, so it'd be the consulship of Caesar and Biblius. They end up calling it the consulship of Julius and Caesar because he's the only guy in charge for that year. But there's a private agreement between Rome's richest man, Marcus Crassus, and Rome's most powerful general, Pompey the Great. And it's called the First Triumvirate. So it's the agreement between Caesar, Pompey, and Crassus. And these three guys are basically, for that year, deciding everything that's done in Rome. So his consulship ends, and he goes Caesar then goes to serve in Gaul for 9 years. At the end of that time period, and trust me, he's not a great guy in Gaul. He kills about 1 million people. He's a genocidal maniac in that period of time and conquers a lot of land. It gets to him through the grapevine that Cato has passed some laws since Caesar has been consul and been in Gaul that made everything he did 10 years before illegal. So they say, Caesar, you got to come back to Rome and answer for all these crimes you committed. And he's like, but they weren't crimes when I did them. They're crimes. You have to come back and answer for them. So Caesar decides that he's going to run for consulship again, because if you become a consul, they actually can't go after you for any crimes, right? You can't be done for that.
Retroactive crimes.
Right, retroactive crimes that didn't exist when you did them. So in Rome, the political culture was very much an in-person culture. So to get voted for consul, you would actually have to show up in person in Rome. Caesar knows if he does this, they're going to arrest him, right, for these crimes he may or may not have committed. So he petitions the Senate to get a law passed that allows him to get elected in absentia. It passes. Cato then blocks the law. It gets it removed. So now he still has to come to Rome to answer for his crimes to be voted for. So then Caesar has 10 legions, and he's coming in the north of Italy. He leaves 9 of them at a river called the Rubicon. And with one of his legions, which is, I believe it's 5,000 men are in a legion, they actually cross the river Rubicon, and that's where he says the die is cast. So the news gets to Rome. It gets to his enemies. Him and Pompey have had a falling out, but Pompey is kind of the general now of Cato, and Cato has working with another guy named Scipio. These 3 guys hear Caesar's coming, so they all just flee Rome. Caesar comes in, and he's now the guy in charge. For the next few years, he's chasing all these guys around Italy and killing them. And he will become dictator for life in 44 BC. But his first action is to pardon his enemies. And those enemies are the ones that kill him. Does that sound very similar to how things break down, though?
It does. It does.
I apologize for that long-winded explanation, but it's not like Caesar just did something. He walked into a power vacuum.
You got to finish the job.
Yeah.
You got to finish the job, man. I'll tell you, I don't know. I'd love to hear, for somebody who actually has all this internalized the way you do, how you see where you've seen similar things done to lesser degrees around us right now, things that are being set up at this point. I remember it was late 2020. We knew something was very, very wrong with the election. Mm-hmm. And I was wondering, if this is really the case, if they're really going to say, no, Donald Trump, you're the loser, and Joe Biden, you're the winner. I actually asked that question a couple of times. Do you think Trump's going to cross the Rubicon? Do you think that he's,
He didn't.
I know. He didn't.
And that's why I think, if you look at a lot, there's definitely some parallels between what happened to Caesar and Trump. But the thing that Trump did is he didn't say I'm president. He said, I may not agree with your decision, but I'm out, guys.
Yeah, I know. There's a lot going on there. I mean, there's just so much. Let me ask you this. Mm-hmm. At the time when Rome fell, I've heard this a lot in my life, and I was talking about this with a friend of the show, and we were putting some notes together. I always have heard that most people living in the city of Rome were slaves by the end of it. That the majority of the population there were slaves. First of all, do you know if is that?
I don't have that information. I'm sorry.
Because I'll tell you.
The thing I can tell you is what starts to happen so Rome falls in the late 5th century. The things that happen in the 4th and 5th century is, first of all, where I put us politically is I put us in what's called Rome's crisis of the 3rd century. So there are 2 major problems. Our number one, 15,000% inflation. We're not there yet, but we've got some pretty bad inflation. And the other one is immigration out of control. Just, people just pouring into the empire because they want to get the social benefits of being in the empire. They didn't want to destroy it. They just wanted all the goodies you could get for being part of it. So in the 4th and 5th century, the problem that you have is you have the immigrants have been pouring in for so long, and they've also been serving in the Roman army, right? Because what happens is generals realize that their power comes from the army behind them. And there had been a plague in the 180s AD where about 10% of the empire dies. So there's this real need for soldiers because, number one, there's less guys to serve, but number two, generals are becoming emperor because they raise an army, attack Rome or attack their enemies and become emperor. So you have 47 different guys in the 3rd century claim to be emperor. So this changes a lot of how the empire functions. So what happens is you have kind of this phase out of Romans being in power to barbarians being in power. And when people think of our barbarians, I don't think they're quite like the way we're told historically. The word Barbary in Greek just means beard. So they were just these bearded guys. They weren't running around naked and burning things down. They were more like Romans than we realized they were. But you have this kind of transition from Roman power to barbarian power. And then as the currency is dying, well, the central power doesn't have any power anymore, and it just becomes a barbarian empire. The 476 fall of Rome, the reason that we get that is because that history is written by the Eastern Roman Empire Emperor Justinian's scribes. Justinian he wants to rule over a combined Roman Empire, so what does he do? He raises an army and attacks Rome to try and unite it, and he destroys what's left. So that's where kind of your thought process on what's left is much different than what we're told. Does that make sense?
It does. And I didn't know that last part. It's just, I guess when we're talking about just the general decay of, or maybe like the point that it was at, even though I know that this is a collapse that takes place over the course of hundreds of years, and they're like different.
We're moving faster though.
Well, and we're going to get into that too.
Yeah.
We're going to get into that in the second half. I have something I want to listen. I want to show you, to listen with you for a little bit, and bring up some ideas I have. But that whole thing about the slave population inside of Rome, I didn't know if that was a myth that needed to be busted or whatever, because it was comparable to how the richest areas in the United States are really in D.C. It's those are some of the richest areas in the United States.
Yeah, Alexandria, all the areas around it.
And the counties that surround D.C., despite how part of the country, it doesn't produce anything, but it's just here it is, all the riches, Rome, and just like D.C. in that respect. But there's a lot more to it. Here's one for you too. Now, people say that that's a little far-fetched that you would just start throwing foreign nationals into the American military.
The Romans did it.
But look what's happening right now in even more intimate ways. This is from today, published today. Headline: DACA, that's deferred action, all that, illegal aliens are eligible to join Seattle's police force as liberal policies blame for dire staff shortages. So again, it's not a physical virus. Who knows? Who knows what's going on there physically? Well, you're just talking about after that a plague. There was there's a 10% shortage in staff out there, so they just started saying, "Hey, listen, we need people to join the army over here." Well, we're already opening up the door to non-citizens to police American citizens, and you know that there's going to be a trade. There's going to be some kind of an offer. Hey, join the army, stay here for 4 to 6 years, and we'll get you on a fast track to citizenship and all that shit.
The problem with that, and this is something I think I messaged you this earlier today, and I think the problem with that is, as you start to bring in more people that don't have buy-in into the system, and the things that they're getting from the system, like as a currency collapses, well, once the currency collapses, they don't need the system anymore. And I think that's the problem that you get into as you start to make this transition from people that aren't American, right? And I think there's a lot of confusions on this too, because people say, oh, you hate immigrants, and it's like, no, I like immigration done the right way, right? Like my family's from Europe, right? Like we weren't born here, right? I'm not Native American, but when you come here, there's a way to come here. And when people are pouring over the borders and doing that illegally, you're overwhelming the system. And are you familiar with Cloward and Piven?
Yeah. So
Cloward and Piven had this idea: you can overwhelm the welfare state, and as you overwhelm the welfare state, you destroy it. And that's a lot of what happened in Rome, because in 212 AD, Emperor Caracalla gives 30 million people in the Roman provinces citizenship overnight. And this is citizenship. There's citizenship with the vote and citizenship without the vote. This is citizenship without the vote. But it entitled them to a lot of things. The grain dole, and there's also social programs and things they were entitled to. So it starts to drain the state, in addition to, the currencies being destroyed because they're debasing it to pay the military, right? To pay they need bigger and bigger armies because the emperors are fighting each other. So they start clipping pieces off of coins. They adding other metals to the coins. So inflation is increasing. Social programs are increasing, and that is how you destroy a state. And it's almost like we haven't learned anything because we're doing the same things.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And what you had said before, too, about how, hey, the people that are coming, they're not necessarily looking to destroy the system. They just want the goodies.
Yes.
But I think
because people didn't want to destroy the Roman Empire. They liked the idea of being Roman and things you could get for it. But after a period of time when the structure doesn't exist for it to exist anymore, well, they don't need it.
So in Rome's we're talking about a time when if you don't like something, if you are a state that is outside of Roman rule and you want to go to war with Rome, you just marshal an army and you start making trouble in a province here and there. There was no real avenue for cultural and psychological subversion to destroy Rome within. Not like we have today with the media. So it seems to me that most of what Rome's biggest problems were organizationally was just gross mismanagement and people who, yes. Like over here, I suspect, I essentially know that the people who are coming over, whereas a Guatemalan national that comes over the southern border, they have been told that there's a job, there is a dole,
a sex change if you want it,
a sex change, whatever the hell you want. It's all over there and it's all free. The streets are paved in rainbows. Okay, and they're coming over here because the dinner bell has been rung, and they don't think that they, as an individual, is going to collapse the great America. But the people who are ringing the dinner bell, I really do believe, are doing this because they know that by those people coming over, Cloward and Piven, this is a way to conquer the United States from within. I think that there is mostly malice driving this because even the stupidest of people know that you can't spend more than you bring in.
I think that's a really important point, and I don't think a lot of people are picking up on it. I think if you look at it, what we have is we kind of have the collapse of Rome and a Maoist revolution at the exact same time, right? Because if you look at it, our culture war is very similar to the Great Leap Forward and a lot of things that happened in China under Mao. They killed all the birds because they were convinced the birds were. What the heck were they? They were eating something and it was causing a problem, or they melted down all the farm implements. It gets to craziness. And Mao had these black identities and red identities. A black identity was something you didn't want to be, like a business owner, a patriot, something like that. And a red identity were one of these good communist groups you want to be a part of. And that's very similar to how people are identifying now. Like you can be trans, or you could be a trans ally, or you can be one of these different groups that becomes acceptable. And we're being used in the same way, Frank, and it's evil. It is.
And in the second half, I want to bring something up and actually talk about the cultural aspect, the cultural downfall out there in Rome. I want to show you a little bit of a public appearance from Camille Paglia when she was talking about transgenderism. In as far as part of being a really interesting piece of the life and death cycle of civilizations. So I want to talk about that in the second half. We have so much more on top of that. I don't know where the hell we're going to find the way to put it all into this last hour. Ladies and gentlemen, go and get yourself a refreshment. Please reshare the show. I'm going to take a really quick intermission. I got over here with Jeremy, and when we come back, you will all be together, and there's more to be done, including your super chats and hopefully some calls. But the calls are looking less and less likely. So send in super chats if you've got questions or anything, any other parallels that you want to throw out there for discussion. We will be right back. Quite Frankly and Rise Attire have come together to create a merchandise collection that is sure to draw eyes and start conversation. High-quality t-shirts and hoodies that are perfect gifts for the Franklies in your life, or even if you just want to treat yourself. You can wear your Quite Frankly gear proudly, knowing that everyone else around you is a fucking loser for not already knowing about the show. So go to the merch tab on quitefrankly.tv and check out the growing collection of Quite Frankly classics, including the Founding Frankly, the Quite Nationals baseball tees and hoodies, the special edition Tony Black tee, or Protest the United Nations like a Chad. It's all laid out for you there on the quitefrankly.tv merch page. And remember, when you wear Quite Frankly merchandise, you're simply better than you were when you were naked.
It's intermission time, folks. Time out to press the like button. Thank you.
Let's watch something else, butthead. No way. Those chicks at school said they love this show. And now we must figure out why, so that we can score with them.
Quite frankly.
Quite frankly.
Quite frankly.
Quite frankly.
Quite frankly.
Quite frankly.
Watch Quite Frankly and stuff.
Quite frankly.
Quite frankly.
Quite frankly.
Quite frankly.
All my fellow Franciscans.
Quite frankly.
Quite frankly.
Quite frankly.
Quite frankly.
Quite frankly. Quite frankly. We'll be in the gulag with you, Frank.
Quite frankly.
Quite frankly.
Quite frankly.
Quite frankly.
Yo, what's good, Frank? Quite frankly.
Quite frankly podcast.
I want to get a Coke. Can I get a Coke?
So everybody watch Quite Frankly with Frank.
Quite frankly.
How dare you?
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Let's get to your super chats real quick. Make sure that those are all taken care of. Stostube, thank you so much for your wonderful blessing out there. And Jay Britt says, Frank, what is this pitter tweeting you speak of? I don't ever recall seeing lightning bugs do this or recognize it as such. Welcome, Jeremy, by the way. Well, there you go. Pitter tweet. What, have you never seen Bambi? You ever seen Bambi where they're like talking about the birds and the bees and the butterflies are pitter tweeting? I don't know.
I don't remember this for some reason.
You remember that? Okay. Well, anyway, I don't know. It just came out. I actually haven't used the phrase in decades, but for some reason, tonight was the first time I said pitter tweeting again. All right. So you see anybody flirting out there, go, oh, look at these two pitter tweeting. Okay, thank you guys. Thank you gals. Let's see, is there any Rumble rants we can get to? There's no Rumble rants, so you guys feel free to send those my way. I'm going to get to the gold pills real quick, and then we're going to go jump right into some stuff that I have here for Jeremy. Just Jesse, thank you so much for the cookie. Thank you, J.C. Blanche. Godspeed, Franklies. Godspeed. Sean Joe and Just Jesse again. I appreciate you. Okay, so first things first. Did you? Oh, you got to take a look at this, Jeremy. You're gonna love this. Maybe you don't. I don't know.
I don't know.
But here, this is from CNN. It came out.
If it's from CNN, I don't love it.
Probably not. But this is from today. Just forget about CNN.
Is this the cheap fakes?
No. It's wine from Rome.
Oh, I saw this. This was kind of cool.
Oldest wine ever discovered in liquid form, found in untouched Roman tomb.
So here's the question I would have, right? Like,
okay.
Doesn't the alcohol content get better with time, right? Like, once again, I don't know a lot about this stuff, but how bad would this stuff fuck you up?
I don't know. See, I don't know. What I was wondering is whether or not somebody out there can tell me if there is like a. I thought that after a while it turned like to straight vinegar. I thought that there was actually.
Maybe. Yeah, I'm not an expert, definitely.
But a 2,000-year-old Roman funerary urn unearthed in southern Spain has been shown to contain the oldest wine ever found, still in liquid form. Discovered during the home renovations at a property in Carmona in 2019, the contents of the urn were analyzed by a team of scientists from the University of Cordoba in a study published on Monday. Study lead author Jose Rafael Ruiz Arebola, a professor of organic chemistry at university, told CNN that the urn was found to contain cremated remains. Oh, fucking forget about it. You're not gonna eat that. You're gonna drink that. Burned ivory thought to come from a funeral pyre and about 4.5 liters of reddish liquid.
Chuck Schumer would drink that.
I'm just gonna say, well, now I don't want to touch it. Now that it's been,
it's adrenochrome, not wine.
I know it's been some strange thing here. I didn't see that part. I was like, oh, cool. Jerry, I wonder if he would drink some of this. No, there's a dead body in it.
No.
Okay, well.
Schumer's in.
Yeah. I would like to marinate my burgers with that.
And then not cook them.
Eat them raw, like the savage that he is. Here is a great question that came in from the audience, Jeremy. Friggin' Personhead says this.
It's a great name.
Yeah. Here's a good question. What does your guest think about the idea that much of our knowledge of the Roman Empire could be completely fabricated? In the 1300s, the church was looking for manuscripts and ancient scrolls and were offering obscenely large sums of money for their retrieval. The theory is that there were some very skilled counterfeit scroll makers out there, and they were sold for very high prices, and is now passed off as legitimate history. Have you ever heard that, or?
So I haven't heard of that, but there's a lot of the opposite problem, where there's a lot of things that didn't survive. So like, as I mentioned, the 212 Edict of Caracalla, we only know it even happened because it was on a tiny, tiny scrap of papyrus. We don't know the context. We don't know why he did it. We don't know what caused him to do it. Julius Caesar, we have a lot of his writings from his time in Gaul, from the campaigns of Caesar, where he written in third person, by the way. Caesar did this, Caesar did that. But we don't have a lot of what survived from his period being the dictator of Rome from 46 to 44 BC. So we actually, I'm sure there's some problems with that, but I'm actually more aware of the opposite, where we have a lot of things that are missing.
Mm-hmm. That was an interesting question. I couldn't wait to hear your answer about that, because I'm
like I've looked at a lot of other things like Dead Sea Scrolls and things like that. So there is definitely interesting. Is it real? Isn't it real? There's been a lot of the Shroud of Turin. There's been a lot of is it real? Isn't it real? So it's very possible.
Robert says, I want to know who were the Roman emperors during the time of Christ and the first growth of Christianity, especially in Rome. Was it Tiberius and then Caligula, and then Nero? I'm probably wrong, but what years did they rule, and who persecuted the early Christians and martyred his disciples?
So I don't remember the exact years. I'm going to be honest with you there, but Tiberius, he's the second emperor. Then after him, you have Caligula. After Caligula dies, you have his uncle Claudius becomes emperor. After Claudius, you have Nero. And there's a lot more persecutions under Caligula. Because Caligula, he has this, they refer to it as a fever at some point in his life. And he goes from like a totally normal guy to like this like insane egomaniacal. So there's a good chance he had some brain damage after this fever. But he does persecute Christians. But the biggest persecution of Christians, and the guy actually bringing them into, feeding them to lions and things like that, is Nero. And Nero is a whole nother interesting character. There's some thoughts that Nero might have been trans at some point, and he might have been the bottom. So there's a lot of weird things about Nero, but he was the most, in kind of the Julio-Claudian emperors, which is the first like 10 emperors, he's the one that persecutes Christians the most.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just in general, I was thinking a lot about that recently because of our springtime reading with the book club. How much time do you spend on the first? I don't know if you spent very much time on it at all, but that first couple of generations of Christianity under Roman rule, because whereas it's more important to Christians than anybody else, it is also a real. Like I said, we just finished reading The Robe for book club in March, and aside from it being an amazing piece of fiction, there was so much in there about how quickly the faith spread around the Mediterranean just within the first year or so of the crucifixion, and the meeting in catacombs and the need for secrecy, but also the assessment of by Roman rule of how there was no real military answer for a movement that openly embraced death and the life of the world to come afterwards. So we know that it was definitely on somebody's radar after a while. Just within the first couple of generations, there's a major persecution there. So I just wonder how much there is on file about it being, the Christian movement being one of those things that is recognized, is debated, is analyzed militarily, socially, all that. Did you do anything on that?
So I read a lot of like primary sources. So the historian Tacitus talks quite a bit about this. Polybius talks a bit about this as well. And I think the thing you have to understand is policies a lot of times were only from emperor to emperor. So, there wasn't this like mass persecution of Christians the whole time through the empire, because for the most part, Rome was pretty permissive of other religions. They really just didn't care. When they would clamp down is when there was some sort of like an emperor is really weak. So what does he have to do? He's going to persecute a group by making them, by killing them, right? So you have that under Nero. The guy is very weak. You have, though he's a famous reformer, you have a lot of persecution in 284 284 to 300 under Diocletian. So whenever things aren't going well, there is a persecution of the empire by Christians, or persecution of Christians by the empire. Sorry, that's backwards. But I think there's also a confusion in how Romans viewed religion versus how Christians viewed religion. And the Romans viewed church and state, so temporal and spiritual power, as the same thing, whereas Christians viewed them as different things, right? Christians would, that when a Roman emperor said, you have to sacrifice to me on my birthday, the Romans would see a Christian not doing that as a political act, whereas a Christian would see it as a spiritual act, right? You're like, hey, I'm fine living here, but I'm not gonna, go after, I'm not gonna ruin my soul for sacrificing to you. So there's a lot of confusion and misunderstanding between this, and it really only shows when there's a weak emperor. If there's not a weak emperor, they typically are leaving Christians alone. Under Constantine, there's in 312, the Battle of Milvian Bridge, is when he has this vision where he sees the Cairo, so the P and the X in Greek, and it says, under this sign you will conquer.
Mhm.
And that's when they put it on their shields. So it doesn't become a Christian empire at that point in time, but it becomes a very heavily influenced Christian empire because how they looked at baptism was also different too. Like people wouldn't get baptized a lot of times until they were on their deathbed, because then they could handle all the sins they committed up to that point, because they thought it forgave all the sins. So it's different than also how it would function later in that time period, if that makes sense. So Constantine he lives as a Christian, but he's not a baptized Christian likely until his deathbed. And it doesn't really become a Christian empire until the 370s under Theodosius. But there is more of a favoritism of Christians after the rule of Constantine in 312.
Have you been able to poke into Pontius Pilate? I've heard.
I don't know that much about it. He's like a minor Roman governor at that point in time. Because
it's more so his life after his time in Judea that was really interesting. That I wanted to learn more about it, because apparently it wasn't a very good life, and I heard that his wife was actually a martyr. She became a Christian. So these are things that I don't know.
That's not really what I'm aware of. So.
Okay. Well,
I apologize. I can't fill that one in.
Well, I don't know. All you got to do is lie. Just.
Yeah, I'm not going to do that. Bite you in the butt, man.
Okay. While we're on the topic, you're talking about weak emperors. I know you said that the height of all this was around what, 117? You said
117 under Trajan.
And that is, are we already we're already well into the empire at that point?
Yeah, no. The empire starts around 31 BC, and it's going to end in 476. So you're kind of like almost a third of the way through at that point in time.
So as far as all the emperors go, what's the most intriguing one? Your favorite one? Is it Aurelius? I mean, I read a lot of Marcus Aurelius, but
it's tough because I think if you look at, it's tough because I like a lot of what Diocletian did. I also hate a lot of what Diocletian did. So it's I don't think there's an emperor I really am like, oh my gosh, I really like this guy. He saw the problems and tried to fix them, but then he also reigns over what's called the Age of Martyrs, and he kills a lot of Christians and other religious people in that period of time. But he sees the economic problem, and he sees the immigration problem, and he tries to fix those things. So we get stability for a little bit, but like I said, it's not great to Christianity. It's called the Age of Martyrs during his rule. Mm-hmm. If you want to look at your craziest is this guy named Elagabalus. He rules in I think it's in like the 220s. It's somewhere around there. And he's like a teenage emperor because he basically gets the job because they're trying to find the next guy to fill the role. And he's a priest of the cult of Elagabal. So there's two different names for him. There's Elagabalus and Heliogabalus. And he's from this cult that worships a black rock. It's like a conical shaped rock that, I don't know, maybe it's from space or something. And he has a wedding for his rock in the city of Rome, and everybody has to come to his rock getting married to another rock. He's pulled in a chariot of prostitutes around the city. He puts his hairdresser in charge of the grain supply, and he would basically appoint people to political positions by the guy with the longest dong.
Really?
So if you were more well endowed, you got the better job.
Wow.
So he was a pretty crazy guy, but like if you gave a college age kid a job like that, what do you think's going to happen?
You see, here's the thing. We hear about Caligula.
Yeah.
Little Boots.
Yeah.
Hear about him all the time, putting his horse in the Senate. Or naming him consul or whatever. What was it?
He named him consul.
Of course, there's Nero with his fiddle. I mean, we get that stuff like that there too. This is one guy I never heard about, and that is crazy. and I have to imagine that there's.
It's one that always shocks people when I bring him up.
And there has to be more like him, but over the course of hundreds of years, there's got to be tons of psychos that pop up all over the place.
Well, there's two emperors that were like by the actual political class hated the most. One was Elagabalus, and the other was Commodus, the son of Aurelius. When Commodus is killed, his body's actually dragged through the streets, and the only other emperor to have that done to him is Elagabalus. His body is dragged through the streets, and they talk about him being the worst emperor since Commodus.
And is that because of cruelty, and that's because of
just mismanagement? There was like kind of nobody in charge, and that was the same problem you have with Commodus. Is the guy wanted to be a gladiator, though he wasn't very courageous. He would fight animals from a platform. They'd all be below him, and he would shoot his bow and arrow at them. while wearing a lion skin on his head, thinking he's Hercules. So they weren't really running anything, and I think for the political class, that's what's going to upset them more, is there's kind of nobody in charge, because then the systems don't function the right way.
God, this is us. This is us, man. I mean, it's crazy. The only thing is that there's probably tons of these commodus types that are just doing their craziest, weirdest, most sadistic things behind closed doors now. And I think maybe that's why, I think that's a lot of people's suspicion, is that maybe that's why it seems that society is becoming more and more permissive, is because the whole frog boiling in the pot kind of a thing, that everybody's trying to get on the same page of a culture that is really ruling the world behind closed doors, and we need to get the public on board with it as being nothing in particular.
I think that's tough too, because like a guy like Elagabalus, like he would try to force the senators to like join in these orgies, and at first the guys are very, permissive of it, like they don't want to, or very dismissive of it, and they don't want to do it. But they eventually all become very involved in it. It becomes a very big part of the culture during that time period. So it's interesting when these people that have ultimate power are kind of given the idea to like do some terrible things, what they'll actually be willing to do.
You remember when Madison Cawthorn, whatever his name, from the Carolinas, it said, "Hey, listen, I was invited to House Representative sex parties, essentially."
Well, remember the videotapes from the congressional halls where the guys were doing with like the masks and belts and stuff like that?
Dude, that's in a Senate chamber that they made gay porn. And not only did that just go away.
What about the military guys with the dog masks? It's like, it's craziness, man.
Dude, it not only did that go away, there was other things that went up. That was being shared inside of like private Discord chats or something like that for people who work in the Beltway.
Yeah.
So there's a secret a sex economy that obviously they took a wrong stance on Gaza or whatever, and all of a sudden that shit came out. Everybody's seeing him getting railed in the Senate chamber, and everybody got really, really upset with Madison or Cawthorn for saying what he said about the invites that were sent his way. And hell, if I think about somebody getting pulled in a chariot by a small battalion of prostitutes, that would not be more shocking than what happens at the average Pride parade.
I could see Biden doing that, hey, grab my hairy legs, man.
Hey, dude, seriously. I mean, there's the worst happens at Pride parades than, sex workers pulling a parade float.
Yeah. Well, I think that's the difficult part about it, because I think people have this idea that when Rome fell, it was at this, terrible point. And I think the thing that's interesting is it was weakened by a lot of those things, and it starts to become like it's interesting because it's actually more of a Christian empire by the time it falls. But the problem is that all the sin and all the debauchery and everything else is kind of eaten away at everything. There's not really much that can save the West anymore. Does that make sense? Like, there's nothing really to save anymore, even though, like, in a way, they've kind of realized their wrongs.
Okay, so then I'm going to introduce this next topic to you. Now, Camille Paglia, very, very famous in her own right, author, researcher, scholar. She is I
think you're the first person to call me a scholar, by the way. I appreciate that.
Well, you are a scholar. You are a scholar, absolutely. And Camille Paglia, she's like an anti-feminist feminist. She has said, she's definitely, left wing and whatever, gay, but she's really, really based about a lot of things. And I really appreciate her mind. And she was talking about, this was like 7 or so years ago, and I remember when it came out, we started talking about it on this show. She's talking about the fall of civilizations, especially Rome and everything else, Greece, whatever, where you see this unraveling of culture over time. And she's talking specifically about transgenderism that she sees going on in our country, in our culture, in the West right now. Mm-hmm. What's going on with sex changes for children and all that stuff. And she starts putting it into a historical context that I really, really would love to hear your take on, because she said, especially in the way that she says that this is reflected by the art that was produced in late phases of civilizations like Rome and everything else. Here is a couple of minutes of Camille Paglia addressing this. Listen to that.
Believes that anyone who collaborates in an intrusion into a developing child's body and mind is guilty of child abuse, a crime against humanity. Okay, because that child is not prepared to make such a decision. Okay, I think that such decisions about sex reassignment surgery must wait when one attains a majority, which would be, it seems to me, a minimum of age 18. I'm very concerned with this because I think that it's become a fashion, okay, that the transgender definition has become a kind of convenient label for young people who may simply feel alienated, okay, culturally for many other reasons, okay. So that in the 1950s they might have become a beatnik, in the 1960s they might have become a hippie and taken mind-expanding drugs, okay. And so today you're encouraged to think that it's an alienation is because you are not totally identifying with your particular inherited gender definition. So I'm very concerned about this. I think that a lot of it, I think that the collaboration of the bureaucratic machinery with it has to do with the assault on masculinity. Okay. Okay. You see, gender doesn't really exist. It's not really polarity. I mean, everything's all about expanding women's rights, but also terminating men. Okay, and defining men out of existence. Masculinity is by definition toxic. Okay, masculinity doesn't exist. And you see, this is the proof of it. Now, I began all of my studies. My book Sexual Personae began as a dissertation at Yale graduate school on androgyny. I've always been fascinated, attracted, to the subject of androgyny, and that's what the sexual personae is. I explored it in history, but the more I explored it, I realized that that historically, the movement toward androgyny occurs in late phases of culture. Okay, as a civilization is starting to unravel. Okay, and that you can find it again and again and again through history in the Greek art. Okay, you can see it happening. All of a sudden, okay, there's a kind of there's the sculptures of handsome nude young men athletes that used to be very robust. Okay, in the archaic period, suddenly begin to seem like wet noodles. Okay, toward the end. Okay, and that the people who live in such periods, a late phase of culture, whether it's the Hellenistic era, whether it's the Roman Empire, whether it's the Mauve decade of Oscar Wilde in the 1890s, whether it's Weimar Germany, people who live at such times, okay, feel that they're very sophisticated, they're very cosmopolitan, okay, homosexuality, heterosexuality, so what, anything goes, and so on. All right, and so, but from the perspective of historical distance, okay, you can see that it's a culture that no longer believes in itself, okay, and then what you invariably get are people who are convinced of the power of heroic masculinity, okay, on the edges, whether they're the Vandals and the Huns, okay, or whether they're the barbarians of ISIS, okay, you see them, starting to mass.
So now this is huge right here.
I agree with her.
Okay, and that's why
in the 4th and 5th century, well, actually, after 378, the Battle of Adrianople. When the Roman Emperor Valens is actually killed in the battle, you are never again going to see a Roman emperor lead an army in battle, which they were supposed to be the best generals and they were supposed to be these great tacticians. Men became soft. And I think that's a lot of what we see now. Like, there's not that many great, we were talking about this, we were talking about athletes. There's not that many great male role models out there. And I think that's the problem because we're told, and it's interesting because there's also an overcorrection on this. There's like kind of this whole sphere of men on Instagram, like, we're men, we swear, we yell at you, and I think that's kind of an overcorrection.
Yep.
Whereas if you look at real masculinity is, being capable and being able to take care of your family and, being educated to a point. But I think she's correct. You do start to lose these things in a fall of a society. And this, she talked about the Hellenistic period. So it's like right after the death of Alexander the Great starts the Hellenistic era. And you start to see this pouring of like Eastern culture into Greek culture, and it starts to feminize the Greeks quite a bit. And this is why in the Roman Republic, to be called Greek at that point in time was considered an insult, because to be Greek was to be like more effeminate in a lot of ways. Whereas in the later empire, the Romans all spoke Greek. It becomes a more acceptable thing, and it's something you see through kind of the shifts in empire.
The high culture portion of that was very interesting to consider. to question things and all that. Now, obviously, this is where I also was starting to think about this. There is a planned psychological warfare aspect to what we are living through. But aside
it's not
from
just psychological; it's physical too. Like, look at all the estrogen in the plastics and stuff like
oh
that.
yeah, you're right. It's a complete environmental, full spectrum dominance, as they say, 100%. Wherever we can run into roadblocks, we're doing that. But aside from this suicidal form of androgyny and everything else, it also seems to be a part of a natural life cycle of civilization. What she was saying, whereas Rome did its thing for over 1,000 years, when you really just add it all up. In our case, the American cycle has been completely sped up. I mean, we are not yet. I mean, let's think about just like the 1960s. We were not yet 200 years old, and I would credit the advent of modern media as a big part of this. And this is where you can start seeing where there is the.
We're more connected than any other time in history. Like, could you imagine if the Romans had this technology?
That's what I'm saying. Would Rome have lasted?
No, I don't think so.
300 years if they had the media that we had.
No. Could you imagine memes of the emperor? How bad that would be,
dude.
Frog memes.
I mean, I think about the wars that were launched just with newspapers and radio alone, and then what they were able to do in the 1960s onward with television. I mean,
how often we're psyoped? Gulf of Tonkin, like all those different things where they play a trick on us and go to war because of it.
Exactly. So I mean, that's what we're seeing right now, I believe. And I've always said that you can really track the ebb and flow of history, the life cycles of civilizations, the rise and fall very, very easily, because we are, as an observer, we can look back across so much recorded history now.
Mm-hmm. It's like a shift from like what is to what we think it is.
Yes.
Does that make sense? Because in Rome, if you're going to kill somebody, you got to bring their head because they're actually dead, right? Like, and it's where the idea of habeas corpus comes from, having a body. Like, you had to prove someone was dead. And I think now it's just our thoughts about things, and we're not even assassinating people right anymore. Now it's just character assassination. Like, we've gone from this total like real involved physical way of being to just being like kind of this esoteric like thought process.
Yeah. And that's why I always say that whenever we have shows that really, I'll open up the lines and we'll talk about hey, what's coming next for us? Or, if there's a really crazy series of events that make you wonder, how much of this is plotted, how much of this is actually just happening and whatever. And people will project where we're going to be in 5, 10, 20 years.
I struggle with that because I think nobody can really predict the future.
Right. And like I said before, whereas you can look through time now, and 2020, hindsight is 2020, where we can talk about what happened with Rome, what happened with Greece, what happened with the Ottoman empires, or the fall of the czars, or whatever the hell that is. We have a little bit more of a space to look back and be objective about it. The one thing we can say about us right now, that yes, there's a rise and there's a fall. The same thing will happen for America, but the X factor with us is no time in history have we had this kind of technology on a consumer level.
And that's why I'm hopeful. I was actually just talking to Chase Geiser about this yesterday. His book actually just came out today, his book about populism. And I think, like, if you look at it, there's two ways there's two major things you need to solve our situation. The first is handling immigration, and the second is handling currency. All those other problems, like, sure, they're problems, but those two things are going to kill us. And those are the two things we need to handle. If we can handle that, and we can get back to, American culture and what it means, we can solve our situation. And I think in no period in history have we been more capable of doing that because, sure, the printing press, but think about how long it would take to print all those papers and how long it would take to get them across Europe. Like, we can communicate in seconds now. And I think that's, even with speech being harder to have on YouTube and on other places, we can still get the word out. And I think that's the most incredible part. So I'm so hopeful in this age of new media and podcasts and things like that, we can have these conversations, whereas in traditional media, you can't have them. CNN and MSNBC are just on blast all day telling you what to believe, and I'm convinced Fox News is run by Democrats anyway, so it's kind of like traditional media doesn't help anybody.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't. And that's why I say there's nothing new under the sun, but we are in a pretty unique position where we can't say for sure.
What got us here can also get us out.
Yes. Yeah, we can't say for sure how it's going to end up. I mean, we're in dire straits right now, and as you can see, a lot of very vulnerable people have taken the programming.
Well, even this whole cheap fakes thing with Biden, where the press secretary came out and said, because I guess she didn't know what the word deep fakes meant or something, where they're talking about all these, like, he looks like a really old man. He's not doing well. You know, he's freezing on stage, and she's saying, "Oh, these are cheap fakes. They're edited. They're things like that." They're telling you not to believe your eyes anymore. Like that's and some people are saying, "Yes, I don't believe my eyes. I believe the media." Yes, like that's crazy, man.
You said it, and I don't know what the whole cheap fake things was about. If that was her way of having a little spin off of
I think
deep
it was a
fakes,
spin-off, yeah.
And you know how they're just so cheesy with that shit. Like they'll put something out there. I don't know. Try to coin a new phrase, but it's true. You say, hey, okay, did he shit his pants today? I don't know, but that's a man who's shitting his pants.
Well, and he's wandering off stage, and people are having to get him, and they're telling you it's not happening. Or when he said true and economic shadow of pressure, or when he called the president of Mexico the president of Egypt. Like the man isn't well. It's like it's not good, man.
Dude. I was sitting down yesterday. I had to go drop a gift off at a friend's, and he was having lunch with another friend. So me and my daughter, we go over there to for a little bit of a break to say hi to some people that we know, and it gets around to talking about just stuff that's going on, Joe Biden, whether or not he's going to last to even next week's debate or anything like that. And I was saying, listen, I'll just put it to you this way, because do you think it's really him? Do you think it's a clone? Do you think it's a mask? I said, I'll put it to you this way. Whoever Joe Biden is right now, whoever's playing him, whatever the hell Joe Biden is right now, I spent many years as a personal trainer, in health and fitness. I mean, you are still very, very, you know what's good. There you go. That's what I'm talking about. Powerlifting. What are we in the business of? Whether you are a trainer yourself or you're just training yourself, you're in the business of human movement of the body. What is supposed to be going? I have had to physically assess so many clients over the years that I'm just meeting to see where their imbalances are, what we have to work on, how bad shape they are, especially if they're old. I physically assess a guy walking like him. I mean,
the arm thing is strange.
Dude,
like
it's fucked up.
Like it's like, did you see that one video where everybody around him's like dancing and he's just standing there like
the Juneteenth thing?
Yeah, it's like that's not normal. Like and like whether it's him or whether it's the clone or where the hell it is, like whoever it is isn't there. Like that's the actual problem you have.
And you
think
like
Ron Burgundy too.
I know, but you think about how many of those frightening moments took place inside of these giant palatial mansions in Rome somewhere.
Well, even like Ronald Reagan, like it's gotten out in the last couple of years of like how bad the last 1 or 2 years of his term was. Like he wasn't in great shape either, and they covered it up. Even FDR, we didn't know the guy's legs didn't work. Like it's kind of crazy, man.
Who the hell? There was a comedian that was talking about that once. I thought it was a great bit about trusting conspiracy theorists, and he's saying that that somebody's crazy uncle back in the 40s was the black sheep of the family for insisting that FDR was in a wheelchair and he couldn't walk.
Well, do you know the last year of Woodrow Wilson's life, he had a stroke?
And his wife was...
And they covered him with a blanket, and his wife would go everywhere with him. So people were like, oh, he's just kind of cold. Woodrow's cold. And it's like... She was probably running the country, and the guy was just not lucid.
She was forging a signature.
Yeah,
and that's the way he ended. By the way, was he a Princeton or Seton Hall guy?
So he was a Princeton guy, but he was actually a Southern transplant to New Jersey, so we don't get to keep him.
Okay, well, to hell with him anyway.
Yeah, like it's crazy. Like the progressive era is actually one of the major things that ruined America, and the guy was actually a vehement racist.
Big time. Well, he was the one. I mean,
Birth of a Nation played in the White House, the first movie.
That was the first time a movie was ever premiered or played at the White House. It was Birth of a Nation, and but of course, the party switched. Didn't you hear?
Yeah, they switched places.
They switched places. They just said, hey, you know what? We want to be the racists now. Okay, fine. You can do that now.
I think people forget they're the ones that own slaves. And once again, not that I love the Republican Party, but the Republican Party are the ones that freed them.
I know. And whatever the reasons for it, that's just, I'm not a fan of either of them. I
just feel like it's just a puppet show, man. It doesn't matter.
It doesn't. And that's why I really, I'm thinking that going forward, if we can use this, whatever we have at our disposal to really just enhance life on a local level, the real issue though is that people, some very, very evil people, control the southern gates. Mm-hmm. And that's something, no matter what the hell what we're doing to shore up our own defenses, or if we're waking up to the realities of just how little people in Washington D.C. or even in Albany have
Have you walked past the Roosevelt Hotel in Midtown, man?
No, but I have friends that manage properties
they're just
down
all
there.
Outside, and there's a dumpster out front too, because like they're giving the illegals like all free stuff, and they're like throwing away brand new strollers and stuff. I'm like, you're kidding me. Like it's that there is it's disgusting, man. Everybody's out in the street. There's just this dumpster out front, and it's nuts.
That's what I'm saying. It's like that's already here.
Yeah.
You know. So there's only so much we can do to prepare ourselves, and of course, knowledge is power, and whatever. But this is stuff that is being invited in, mm-hmm. and I'm sure we're all going to have some shared experiences on that level, because they're not going to stay in one place, especially when the grain silos are dry in New York City. They're going to have to go somewhere else.
Well, and I don't have a solution to that, but at the same time, I do think if we can do things locally, I think the pandemic proved this to us. Like if you have a good people locally, you can do something, right?
Yeah.
And I think we got to look at where we can be cause and not effect. And I think far too often we're being told your effect, everything happens to you. So I think we have to look at like where are our cause points, right? Where are the places we can be cause? And I think if you can get involved in your school, or you can get involved in your town, you can get involved in your mayoral race, like these are things you can actually do and you can actually have an impact on. And I think if we do that as in a mass group, well, then we can start to handle the country, right? Because it starts small and you got to work your way out. I think what the problem is, we try to work big and work our way down, and it just doesn't work like that.
Right. I mean, I was even talking with getting back to the migrant thing there too, about, hey, it's already here. It's not about what can we do we can't go back in time and retroactively prevent 11 million people just within the last couple of years showing up.
Well, they're not even going to be able to find them, man.
I know. But in many respects, you know, it's the men, it's the single men that are just out there roving about, you know, those lone wolves, they go out, they'll find themselves a pack. They'll find whatever they do. It's the people who are looking over families, and they're the much fewer number. That's the minority of who's come over. Mm-hmm. Women with children that are actually their own, whole family units. That's a lot more rare compared to
That's correct.
The multiple armies of men that have come over.
Well, it's not even that. Like most of the people, like a good deal of the people coming across, I don't know about most, but a good deal of aren't even from South America. Like they're from countries in Africa. They're from countries in the Middle East. They're from, I've heard talk of Chinese nationals on the border. So it's like not even all the people coming across are migrants. They're people that are just using the opportunity.
I had my friend, he's a priest. I was talking to him a little bit yesterday too. And he understands what's going on, where they're all coming from, and what might be the motive of those who are encouraging this kind of behavior from up top. But again, there he is from the standpoint of a church. He's got migrant, illegal alien mothers with sometimes 2 or 3 children that show up knocking on the door of the church, crying, talking about their regret. If I knew it was going to be this hard, I would never come. And I was, I'm sitting there like, well, yeah. But
you're human. What are you supposed to do?
But he's coming from that standpoint. He's like, listen, I understand that they shouldn't be here, but when somebody knocks on your door and they need help, mm-hmm. and I see a women and children,
it's human suffering. What are you supposed to do about it?
Exactly. That's the whole point here, and that's of course the most insidious thing about everything, because people have been weaponized by those elitists that
they're preying on the fact that humans, by their nature, are inherently good.
Yeah.
They're preying on that fact.
they've weaponized compassion, yeah. But and at the same time, they've also turned us against each other so that we can't assess the situation clearly enough and with a critical mass to be able to push back and actually put people in their places.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's it. We don't have critical mass because, like you said, there are so many people who can be told, "Don't believe your lying eyes," and they'll say, "You got it, I won't." And that's a real big issue. And this is also part of the reason why I asked you about the whole concept of, or the myth about Rome being populated more by slaves than anybody else toward the end, because what we're talking about here is a multinational, many, many millions over, a permanent dependent underclass that is being imported right now to be able to, I don't know, to be able to just undercut any kind of real citizen interest.
Well, it blew my mind when they gave they gave the fact in the movie, the Sound of Freedom, and I had to look it up after because I want to see if it was actually true, that there's more people in slavery now globally than in any other point in history. That's wild, man. And like for a lot of those people, like they've had to give up everything to get here. Like, so are they even free? You know, I think that's part of the problem too.
I would actually go far, and to say this on Juneteenth, I know is sacrilegious, but I would actually say go as far as that slavery in this country has never been worse. It knows.
Well, if you're dependent on the government, you're not free.
It knows no race in particular, though of course non-white demographics are hit particularly hard. But I don't think. Whereas it's a whole nother level of bondage, not to be let out of a cell or not to be allowed off of a certain piece of property. It is still you can still be in bondage and still be free to leave your apartment building to go down to the bodega to pick up a ramen noodle or something like that. It could still be if you're not really in control of your life. You can't support yourself. You're not very educated and therefore not really aware. What are you? And that is.
Well, you even look at there was a guy last year in New York City where his shop gets burglarized. He defends himself. They send him to prison for defending himself. It's like if you can't stop somebody from taking things that are yours or harming yourself and your family, like what are you then?
Yeah, this is part of the plot. This is why I say there. It's definitely one of those things that you can go and look throughout history and see there's a life cycle to civilization, but we have a little something added on top of it with modern communication. I mean, it was already easy to start swaying public opinion and duping people just with newspapers, radios, and everybody's belief that people in charge actually had their best interest in mind. But now I think that there's more distrust ever before. But all of the methods of really influencing people are becoming more and more covert, more algorithmic, more subconscious than ever before.
With a little bit of Chinese communism sprinkled on top.
It's crazy. Bolshevism, right? It's straight up Bolshevism. So, okay. So that's really, man, I know it was a long ride. So I'm not going to ask you to do this a lot. But you definitely got to zoom in sometime. We got to do more shows like this.
Yeah, you let me know, man. I will come whenever you want. As I said, it's funny when you reached out. I was like, it's kind of cool when a show I actually listen to reaches out to me.
Yeah, and I didn't even know that, because we follow each other on Twitter, and I saw you doing the Roman Empire thing there. I said I always want to talk to somebody about Rome.
Well, this is funny. So we just got our bathroom redone, right? And the guy remodeling my bathroom, I guess you mentioned me on the show recently. He goes, "Wait, you're going to be on Quite Frankly?" Our bathroom remodeling guy apparently listens to you.
Wow. see, this is another reason I'm talking about. It's stories like that.
Yeah.
Until I hear stories like that told to me in email or face to face, I don't really know how far the show is getting. I don't trust anybody's metrics.
Yeah. Well, I heard about you from a friend. My friend Drew told me about this show like 3 years ago. Started listening to you, and then I found out about Tracy Beans from you, and I started listening to Dark to Light. So it's just like I think that's how those things travel, man.
Well, I'm glad that we're all becoming friends. I think that the new media landscape is a very exciting place, and of course, it's the X factor. It's the X factor that we can't really account for yet in the life cycle of a civilization.
Yeah.
And I hope that we can just I hope the die is cast, as you said before. Let's. So before we leave, real quick, what is your? I would love for you to tell me if there's a favorite story. Like I remember reading about how the slander and political just like insults among the public figures and all that stuff today is nothing compared to what was going on in Rome, that people would accuse each other of being incestuously,
The big knock on Caesar is they used to call him a bottom, because they would say that there was, when he was a boy, they would say that there was a local king outside of Rome that he was kind of going and submitting himself to at different times. So that was it was one of the things often politically in public used against Caesar. He was called, the Roman version of what is a bottom.
I have this over here. That's crazy. I have this over here. This is what slander in the Roman Republic from 509 to 27 BC was extreme, even by modern standards.
That's the Republic period.
Okay, yeah, there you go, for the Republic. The famous speaker and politician Marcus Tullius Cicero.
Yep.
For instance, when he defended his supporter Cestius, did not shrink from publicly accusing the enemy Claudius of incest with brothers and sisters, said Professor Jane.
Well, Claudius was an interesting guy. So he was born Claudius, but he was able to get his class changed because he wanted to be a plebeian so he could be a tribune. So he gets his name changed from Claudius to Clodius. And Julius Caesar actually divorces his first wife when he goes to a house party and finds his wife making out with Clodius, who's dressed as a woman. So Clodius is a very interesting character if you find out more about that guy.
So
Not the Emperor Claudius. The guy's name is Clodius. Clodius Pulcher.
That's what we're talking about over here.
Yeah.
So Clodius is like is the most contemporary form of lesbian.
Look at Dylan Mulvaney. He was a guy. So
a guy dressed as a girl who's kissing a girl and considers himself a lesbian, probably.
Yeah. So it's like a Dylan Mulvaney type.
Man, those Romans. Jeez, what the heck?
Yeah, he was called Clodius Pulcher or Clodius the Beautiful.
The Beautiful. Oh man. See, this makes them, as crazy it makes them human. Most people, when we take an interest in something this far off in the past, these people, these emperors, common folk, whatever the hell they are, they only exist to us as mosaics or marble busts.
Well, here's an interesting one, because there's also a lot of things we pick up from Rome that we don't realize we picked up from Rome and we don't know what it means. Like, have you heard the idea of carrying your wife across the threshold after you get married?
Yeah.
So that actually comes from when Romulus founded Rome as a kingdom. It was basically all men, because it was like his war band and whoever he could find to like be part of it. So they invite this neighboring tribe called the Sabines to dinner. And during the meal, all the men kidnap all the women and rape them. That is where the idea of carrying a woman across the threshold came from, because they took their first wives against their will.
Well. Okay.
Yeah. And then we all just kind of nicely, hey, honey, we're taking you across. It's our new home. Yay.
Well, you know what? I have something for you. Maybe you know this, maybe you don't. I don't know, but I thought it was a great, and I kept this as an extra. And why not? Let's just get into it. This is a history lesson for people who think that that history doesn't matter. This is from a guy named Bill Holohan.
Okay.
And it has a lot to do with Rome and two horses' asses. Do you know the story?
No, I don't.
Okay, then you're gonna love it.
Okay.
Here we go. It's an old Tumblr post I kept, and I said, you know what? I'm dusting it off.
Tumblr.
Yep, I know. What's the big deal about railroad tracks?
I do know this.
You do?
They couldn't fit that Roman roads were the size of two horses' asses, and they wanted to use the old Roman roads as the railroad beds, so they made them the size of two horses' asses.
There you go. I mean, what do you want me to say? The U.S. standard railroad gauge distance between the rails is 4 feet 8.5 inches. That's an exceedingly odd number. Why was that gauge used? Well, they built them in England, and English engineers designed the first U.S. railroads. Why did the English build them like that? Because the first rail lines were built by the same people who built the wagon tramways, and that's the gauge that they used. So why did they use that gauge? Because the people who built the tramways used the same jigs and tools that they had used for building wagons, which used the same wheel spacing. But why did the wagons have the particular odd wheel spacing? Well, if they tried to use any other spacing, the wagon wheels would break more often on some other long-distance road in England. You see, that's the spacing of the wheel ruts. So who built those old rutted roads? Imperial Rome. They built the first long-distance roads in Europe, including England, for their legions. Those roads have been used ever since. And what about the ruts in the road? Well, Roman war chariots formed the initial ruts, which everyone else had to match or run the risk of destroying their wagon wheels. Since the chariots were made for Imperial Rome, they were all alike in the matter of wheel spacing. Therefore, the United States standard railroad gauge of 4 feet 8.5 inches is derived from the original specifications for an Imperial Roman war chariot. Bureaucracies live forever. So the next time you are handed a specification, procedure, process, and wonder, what horse's ass came up with this? You can wonder that. You may be exactly right. Imperial Roman armory chariots were made just wide enough to accommodate the rear ends of 2 war horses. Now, the twist of the story, when you see the space shuttle sitting on its launch pad, there are 2 big booster rockets attached to the sides of the main fuel tank. These are solid rocket boosters, or SRBs. The SRBs are made by Thiokol at the factory in Utah. The engineers who designed the SRBs would have preferred to make them a bit fatter, but they had to be shipped by train from the factory to the launch site. The railroad line from the factory happens to run through the tunnel in the mountains, and the SRBs had to fit through that tunnel. That tunnel is slightly wider than the railroad track, and the railroad track, as you now know, is about as wide as 2 horses' asses. So a major space shuttle design feature of what is arguably the world's most advanced transportation system was determined over 2,000 years ago by the width of a horse's ass.
So the thing I don't get is, why did Bezos's rocket look like a penis? That's what I don't understand.
I think that they just, you're talking about things that happen behind closed doors. I just think that's what it comes down to, man. With little winks and nods. That's that. So, okay, last thing then, a badass. If you're going to look throughout, this is Badass Appreciation Month on Quite Frankly. If you're going to go throughout all of your Roman knowledge, what is a person, a figure that you would say was the most badass that you actually think is just, man, needs to just be saluted for their badassery? Anybody?
So, and it's funny because I think I had talked to you about this beforehand. I actually think Julius Caesar is a pretty cool badass. And I think a lot of times what we know of Caesar is because his enemies outlived him, and we don't have a lot of his writings from after his campaigns in Gaul. He was kind of just a brilliant military tactician that outlasted a lot of his opponents, and the major mistake he made was forgiving his enemies, and his enemies later took him out and then destroyed any writings he would have had. So I think how we look at him historically is a lot different than how the man actually was, because we don't have a lot of his writings.
Well, then there you have it. Julius Caesar is the badass. He might have been a nominee about 2 or 3 years ago, but it doesn't matter. You're the guest of honor.
Well, thank you.
So your badass pick is what goes tonight. So let everybody know what your schedule is with your podcast. Your URL is in the description of this episode, so I hope that they click through and watch the rest of your work. But let everybody know how to keep up with you, man.
So we're over on YouTube and on Rumble. I'm the Jeremy Ryan Slate Show. We publish on Mondays and Wednesdays. As you mentioned in the beginning, my company is Command Your Brand, and we help to facilitate conversations like this, because I think that the only way we handle our situation is by having better conversations and better ideas. And if you're looking for help with that, I put together a really great piece called Command Your Empire, because I want to help people not just grow their companies, but sustain them and make them expand that empire. So if you head over to commandyourempire.com, there's some really great new media PR tips over there, and they can check those all out. So that's commandyourempire.com.
Oh, man, thank you so much. I have a couple of super chats here real quick.
Yeah, let's do it.
Here it is. Sentinel says, I have felt that we are Rome now since the GWOT started. What's that?
Global War on Terror.
Global War on Terror started.
GWOT.
That GWOT. With 36 years of service in the National Guard, I have witnessed a merit-based system creep towards socialism, stealth gay policy with don't ask, don't tell, to repeal defense of marriage, to full acceptance of transsexual. Now they are talking drafting women because red-blooded men won't enlist for a $50,000 bonus. Good show, and I enjoyed your guest greatly.
Well, thank you for your service, sir. And I will say, too, in some ways he's right, too, because if you look at a lot of what made the Roman Republic fall is the Punic Wars, because Rome, they changed a lot of how their empire or their republic functioned just to beat Carthage, which is a lot of what we did for our war on terror. So in some ways, he's not wrong.
I know, and that was 20 years and many trillions of dollars on that war of terror that yielded us nothing. And in the end, we left Afghanistan.
We gave our weapons to our enemies.
Yeah, in the end, we left Afghanistan and left them a fully mechanized army and piles of cash. Yeah. Anyway, Sean, Joe, thank you. And Stephen and Lori says, another fun show. Thanks, Frank. Thank you, guys and gals. I'm releasing that scratching over there on Pilled. Thank you, everybody that's been watching on quitefrankly.tv. Thank you, everybody on Rumble and on YouTube and on Twitter and Twitch, DLive, and beyond. We will see you guys tomorrow. My guest tonight, Jeremy Ryan Slate, and it was a wonderful, seriously, have a wonderful trip back home, man. I hope you enjoy yourself.
Yeah, hopefully I catch a couple innings of the Yankee game on my way home.
They are in the bottom of the sixth. They're losing 4-1.
Ah, Garrett Cole.
They took him out after I don't know what the hell happened.
He imploded.
It was a 2-run home run by Urias, and then they just added on another one with whoever the hell they brought. I think Marinaccio came in, but they have a chance. We'll see. I don't know. Keep the faith, and listen, say hello to your family and have fun with those chickens and pigs and all that other good stuff, and we'll talk soon.
Sounds good.
All right, everybody. Have a great night. Thanks for the time. See you tomorrow night, 7 o'clock.
I'll catch you on the flip side.
Quite Frankly is filmed before a live studio audience, and now our super chatters, starting with Stowstube, Jay Brits, and an army of gold pillars. I love you all so much. Tomorrow night is the last show of the week because we're taking a summer Friday on the 21st, so it's going to be a good one. I hope you show up. Time for calls, time for a lot of great theorizing. It's going to be good. It'll be indicative of Quite Frankly's spirit. All right. Good night.
He knows too well how to manipulate the mob.
Marcus Aurelius had a dream that was Rome, Proximo. This is not it. This is not it.
Marcus Aurelius is dead, Maximus. We mortals are but shadows and dust. Shadows and dust, Maximus!
Bringing Lyceum.
Will you shut up?